There are moments in life that split everything into a before and an after. For me, that moment happened on a Tuesday morning in October. The leaves were turning gold outside my front window. I remember that clearly, the gold of the leaves, because after what happened next, I didn't notice beautiful things for a long time. I was in my kitchen, pouring my second cup of coffee, wearing the same flannel shirt I'd worn every cool morning for 10 years. My wife Margaret used to tease me about that shirt. She'd say, "Michael, that thing is older than our marriage." And I'd say, "That's exactly why I'm keeping it." She'd laugh. Lord, I miss that laugh. I heard the knock at the front door. Firm, official, not the way a neighbor knocks. I opened it to find a man in a gray suit holding a clipboard. Young, maybe 30. He had the expression of someone doing an unpleasant job and trying very hard not to look like it. "Mr. Brennan?" he said. "That's me," I said. "I represent Crestview Property Holdings. I'm here to inform you that this property was sold and transferred last month. Vacant possession is required within 30 days. There are relocation resources available if you—" I stopped hearing him after the word sold. Sold. My house. The house I'd lived in for 31 years. The house Margaret and I brought our son Danny home to. The house where we'd painted the nursery yellow twice because Margaret changed her mind. The house I'd signed over to my son just 8 months ago to help him, because I loved him, because I trusted him with my life. Sold. I stood there in my flannel shirt, holding my coffee cup, and felt the ground shift beneath my feet. "Sir," the man in the gray suit said, "do you have any questions?" I had about 1,000 questions, but I couldn't speak. Not yet. Because that moment, that Tuesday morning in October, was just the beginning of my plunge. Let me tell you who I am before I tell you what happened, because I think it matters. My name is Michael Brennan. I'm 70 years old. I spent 34 years as a firefighter in Columbus, Ohio. I started at 22, fresh out of the Army, and I retired at 56 with a back that ached in cold weather and a heart that was full of something I can only describe as purpose. I've carried people out of burning buildings. I've sat with strangers in the worst moments of their lives. I've done CPR on a child and lost, and I've done it on a child and won. And I can tell you that both of those moments live in you forever. You don't walk away from 34 years of that work unchanged, but you walk away knowing exactly who you are. I am a man who keeps his promises. I am a man who shows up. I am a man who believed that family is the most sacred thing in the world. Margaret passed 6 years ago, pancreatic cancer, 4 months from diagnosis to gone. She was 62, and she deserved so much more time, and the unfairness of it is something I still carry like a stone in my chest. But I kept going. That's what she would have wanted. Margaret was practical that way. "Grief is love with nowhere to go," she told me once when her mother passed. "So put it somewhere useful, Michael." I put it into Danny. Daniel Anthony Brennan, my son, 41 years old. I'm not going to pretend the relationship was perfect. It wasn't. Danny and I are different kinds of men. He was always drawn to shortcuts, where I was drawn to the long way around. He got into real estate investment in his 30s, which made sense, and then he got into some riskier ventures, which made less sense. And then he married a woman named Carla, who I always thought looked at our family the way you look at a house you're thinking of buying, calculating the square footage. But he was my son, my blood, my responsibility. And his daughter, my granddaughter, Emma, she was 9 years old and had Margaret's eyes and my stubbornness, and I loved her more than I knew how to say. So when Danny came to me 2 years ago and said he was in trouble, real trouble, financial trouble, I listened. "Dad," he said, sitting at my kitchen table, "I made some bad calls. The
The Westfield development fell through. I'm looking at losing everything. I asked him what he needed. He said, "If you signed the house over to me, just put it in my name, it would give me the leverage to refinance the business debt. You'd still live there, nothing would change. I just need the asset on paper." I want you to hear what I was thinking in that moment because I've replayed it 1,000 times since. I was thinking, he's my son. He's in trouble. This is what fathers do. I was not thinking, get a lawyer, read the documents carefully, ask more questions. I signed the papers 3 weeks later. I also moved a portion of my savings, $112,000, into a joint account that Danny said would be easier for managing shared expenses. I was not stupid. I was trusting. There's a difference. And that difference, I would learn, can cost you everything. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you love, this story is for you.
After the man in the gray suit left my doorstep, I sat down on my porch steps and stayed there for a long time. I want to be honest with you about what that felt like. It didn't feel like anger at first. It felt like floating, like the connection between me and the solid world had been cut, and I was just drifting, watching everything from a strange distance. He sold the house. My son sold my house. I called Danny 6 times. Each one went to voicemail. On the 7th call, he picked up. "Dad?" His voice was careful, rehearsed. "Tell me what happened," I said. I kept my voice steady. I'd learned that in the fire service. Steady voice, calm hands, even when everything around you was burning. "Dad, I can explain." "I'm sure you can. Start explaining." There was a long pause. I could hear traffic in the background. He was driving somewhere, probably running somewhere. "The refinancing didn't work out the way I planned," he said. "Carla and I, we had to make some hard decisions. The house was the only real asset. We got a good price. Dad, listen, we found you a really nice place, Sunrise Gardens, over in Westerville. Private room, activities, meals. It's genuinely a good facility." "You were going to put me in a nursing home," I said. "It's a retirement community," without asking me. Silence. "Danny," I took a breath. "I gave you my house. I gave you $112,000, and you sold the house, took the money, and arranged to put me in a facility without a single conversation. Dad, you're 70. You live alone. It made sense. I carried people out of burning buildings until I was 56 years old. I mow my own lawn, I drive my own car, I cook my own meals. Do not tell me what makes sense for my life." "Dad, I'm gonna hang up now," I said. "Don't call me." I hung up, and then I sat on those porch steps a while longer, and the gold leaves kept falling, and somewhere down the street a kid was riding a bicycle, and the world kept moving like nothing had happened at all. That night, I checked into a motel on Route 40, $43 a night, a room that smelled like carpet cleaner and old cigarettes. I sat on the edge of the bed, and I looked at my hands, these old hands that had done 34 years of hard and honest work, and I felt something hardened inside me. Not rage, something colder and more deliberate than rage. Purpose. If you've ever had someone take not just your property, but your dignity, you know what I mean. It wasn't really about the house. It was about the way he did it, the planning of it, the assumption that I could be moved around like furniture, that my life was something to be managed rather than respected. Danny didn't just betray me. He decided somewhere along the way that I didn't matter enough to be told the truth, and I was not going to let that stand. I called Frank Kowalski the next morning. Frank and I came up together in Station 14 back in 1982. He left the fire service after 12 years to go to law school. Late bloomer, he always said, with that big laugh of his. He'd been practicing civil and estate law in Columbus for over 20 years. He was 68 years old, semi-retired, and still one of the sharpest minds I'd ever known. "Michael," he said when he heard my voice, "it's been too long. How are you?" "Frank," I said, "I'm going to need your help." I told him everything, all of it. The property transfer, the joint account, the man in the gray suit, the conversation with Danny. Frank listened without interrupting, which was one of his great skills as both a lawyer and a friend. When I finished, there was a short silence. "All right," he said. "I need you to bring me every document you have, everything you signed. Bank statements, any texts or emails from Danny about the arrangement. Can you do that?" "I have copies of everything," I said. "I kept copies. Always keep copies. 34 years in the fire service teaches you documentation. Every incident, every decision, every chain of events, you write it down, you keep it, because someday someone will ask." "Good man," Frank said. "Come to my office tomorrow. And Michael, don't contact Danny again until we talk." Over the next 3 weeks, Frank and I went through everything with a fine-tooth comb. What we found was worse than I'd imagined, and better than I'd feared. Worse because the deliberateness of it was chilling. Better because the evidence was clear. The property transfer documents contained a clause buried on page 7 in language I hadn't fully parsed that allowed Danny to sell without requiring my consent, even while I retained right of residence. Except that clause had been modified after I signed. My signature was on an earlier version. The recorded version had different language. That's document fraud. Frank said it plainly, without drama. "Michael, this is fraud." The joint account had been drained, all $112,000 over an 8-month period, moved in chunks to an LLC that Danny and Carla had formed the same month I signed the papers. An LLC I'd never been told about. And then there was the voicemail. Danny had called me 3 weeks before the man in the gray suit knocked on my door. I hadn't listened to it. I'd been in the hospital for a minor procedure and had forgotten, but it was still there on my phone. And when I played it in Frank's office, I heard Danny's voice saying, "Dad, look, the sale is going through next month. Carla and I think it's better if we just handle the transition. We'll call you when things are settled." He'd told me, in a voicemail, because then he could say he'd told me. I sat in Frank's office and listened to my son's voice, and I thought about Margaret. I thought about what she would have felt hearing this, and I thought, no, not this. He doesn't get to do this. Frank filed the civil suit within the week. It wasn't simple or fast, these things never are, but the evidence was solid. The modified document was identified by a forensic document examiner. The LLC transfers were traceable. The voicemail established prior knowledge and intent to exclude me from the process. Through it all, I kept my life as steady as I could. I stayed in the motel for 6 weeks, then moved into a small furnished apartment near Clintonville that Frank helped me secure through a community resource program for seniors. I cooked on a 2-burner stove. I walked 2 miles every morning. I called Emma every Sunday. Always Sunday because Danny and Carla went to the gym Sunday mornings and Emma was home with the babysitter. And the babysitter was a 19-year-old named Kylie who had absolutely no interest in monitoring a 9-year-old's phone calls. "Grandpa, Dad said you're traveling." "I am," I said carefully. "I'm just in a different place for a while." "Are you coming back?" "Yes," I said. "I'm definitely coming back." If you've ever had to hold yourself together for the sake of a child who needs you, you know what that conversation cost me and what it gave me at the same time. The mediation happened before the trial, which is how these things usually work. Danny showed up with a lawyer I didn't recognize. Young, expensive-looking, the kind of lawyer you hire when you're trying to intimidate someone. Carla sat beside Danny, her expression carefully neutral. I hadn't seen either of them in months. I sat across the table from my son, and I looked at him. really looked at him, and I tried to find the boy I'd raised, the one I'd taught to ride a bike in our driveway on Clearwater Lane, the one who cried when our dog, a beagle named Captain, passed away when Danny was 12, the one who called me from college at 2 in the morning when a friend of his overdosed and he didn't know what to do. He was in there somewhere, but he was buried under something else now, something hard and frightened and self-protective. I didn't hate him. I want to be clear about that. Hatred would have been easier, honestly. What I felt was more complicated, a grief that sat right alongside the determination to see this through. The mediation lasted 4 hours. Danny's lawyer presented the position that the property transfer had been fully consensual and clearly documented. Frank presented our evidence, the document discrepancy, the LLC transfers, the voicemail. When the mediator heard the voicemail, there was a long silence in the room. Danny looked at his hands. "Daniel," the mediator said, "would you like to take a break?" "No," Danny said quietly. His lawyer asked for a private conference. They stepped out for 20 minutes. When they came back, something had shifted. The settlement offer came an hour later. It was significant, but it wasn't enough. "I want the house," I said to Frank quietly, while the other side conferred. "They may not agree to that," Frank said. "The sale to the third party complicates things. That buyer is innocent in all of this." "I know," I said. "I'm not asking to take it from the buyer. I want the equivalent. I want my life back." Frank looked at me for a moment. Then he nodded. The final settlement, reached 40 minutes later, included full restitution of the sale proceeds from my home, full return of the $112,000 plus interest, a formal legal acknowledgement of the fraudulent document modification, which went into court records and would follow Danny's name permanently. Danny's lawyer tried to negotiate the last point away. Frank held firm. I had told him it wasn't optional. Because this was never just about the money. It was about the record. It was about the truth being documented somewhere, in ink, where it couldn't be explained away or rewritten. It was about my dignity being returned to me in a form that couldn't be taken back. When the settlement was signed and the mediator called a close, Danny finally looked at me. His eyes were red. He looked like a man who had run a very long way and arrived at a place he didn't want to be. "Dad," he said, "I'm sorry." I looked at him for a moment. "I know," I said. "I hope someday you understand what sorry needs to look like." Then I picked up my jacket and walked out. Outside, the autumn air was cool and clean. Frank put a hand on my shoulder. "How are you doing?" he asked. "I'll let you know in a few days," I said honestly. "Right now, I just need to walk." I walked for 2 miles through the city I'd protected for 34 years, and for the first time in months, I felt the ground solid under my feet. If you've ever stood on the other side of something you thought might break you, you know what that walk felt like. With the settlement funds restored, I had options I hadn't had in 6 months. I looked at returning to my old neighborhood, but the house on Clearwater Lane wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to a family who'd bought it in good faith and was busy making it their own. I found myself strangely at peace with that. A house is walls and floors. Home is something you rebuild. I found a ranch-style house in Bexley, single floor, good bones, a large backyard, a wide porch that faced west so you could see the sunset. The previous owners were a retired couple who'd kept everything in meticulous shape. It felt like a place that had been loved, and I decided to love it too. I moved in on a Thursday in early March. Frank helped me carry boxes. A woman from my old firehouse, a captain named Denise, who I'd mentored back when she was a probie, brought over a casserole and a bottle of decent red wine. "You look better than I expected," she said, setting the casserole on my counter. "I feel better than I expected," I said, which was true. There's something they don't tell you about surviving a betrayal. The other side of it is clearer than anything you've ever seen. When you've lost something completely and then clawed your way back to solid ground, you see your life with a sharpness that's almost painful. You see what matters. You see what doesn't. What mattered was Emma. Danny and I had reached an arrangement, not warm, not comfortable, but functional.
He retained supervised visits with Emma on alternating weekends, but I had established through the settlement process that my relationship with Emma was separately recognized and protected. It had taken some additional legal maneuvering, and Frank had been extraordinary. The first time I picked Emma up for a Saturday together, she ran down the front walkway and threw her arms around my waist. "Grandpa," she said, into my coat. "Hi, Bug," I said. I held her for a moment. "You ready?" "Where are we going?" "Wherever you want." She chose the Science Museum. Of course she did. She was Margaret's granddaughter. We spent 4 hours looking at exhibits about space and weather and the deep ocean, and Emma asked questions that I mostly couldn't answer, which made us both laugh. On the way home, she said, quietly, "Dad said you were fighting." "Your dad and I had a disagreement," I said carefully. "Grown-ups have them sometimes." "Are you going to be okay?" I looked at her, those eyes that were Margaret's eyes, and I said, "Yes, I am absolutely going to be okay." What mattered was community. I'd been thinking during those long months in the motel and the apartment about loneliness, about how many people my age were navigating exactly what I'd navigated, not necessarily betrayal, but isolation, the quiet erosion of purpose that comes after you stop working, after a partner passes, after children grow away, the way the world can suddenly feel like it's running on a frequency you can't quite hear anymore. I opened my porch on the first Saturday of every month. I told Denise about it, and she told a couple people, and within 2 months I had 17 regulars, retired teachers, veterans, nurses, a former city councilman, a woman named Ruth who had been a librarian for 40 years and had opinions about everything and was usually right. We drank coffee and ate whatever someone brought, and we talked, really talked, the way people talk when they're not performing anything for anyone. We talked about what mattered, and what we'd learned, and what we wished we'd done differently, and what we were still doing. One Saturday morning, Ruth arrived early and helped me set up the chairs on the porch, and she said, without preamble, "You know what this is, don't you? This is what churches used to be, before everything got complicated." "I'm not starting a religion, Ruth," I said. "No," she said, settling into a chair. "Just a neighborhood." I think that's the finest thing anyone has said about what I was trying to build. A year has passed since the man in the gray suit knocked on my door. I'm sitting on my west-facing porch as I write this, or rather as I think through what I want to say to you, because that's how I do things. I think it through first, and then I say it. The sun is setting, and it is the color of the leaves on that October morning, and I've decided to let that be a good thing instead of a hard one. I want to tell you what I've learned. Not wisdom. I don't have wisdom. I have observations. But maybe that's what wisdom is. Observations accumulated over a life honestly lived. I learned that love is not the same as enabling. You can love someone fiercely, genuinely, with your whole self, and still refuse to let them rewrite the truth of what they did. Those two things can coexist. I loved Danny while I fought him in mediation. I love him still, in the complicated, careful way you love someone who has injured you. I don't know if he'll ever be the son I hoped to have, but I know I'll never stop being his father. I learned that dignity is not something anyone can actually take from you permanently. They can displace it. They can force you to go looking for it, but it comes back if you go looking honestly. I learned that the people who show up, Frank with his legal files, Denise with her casserole, Ruth with her opinions, Emma with her questions about the ocean, those people are family in every way that matters. I learned that 70 is not old. 70 is experienced. There's a difference. And that difference, I've decided, is something worth celebrating. Danny has not called me since the mediation. I have not called him. I'm not sure what the next chapter of that relationship looks like. Maybe there isn't one. Maybe someday there is. I've stopped trying to write that story in advance. It will unfold as it unfolds. Emma called me last Sunday. She'd been reading a book about volcanoes, apparently a passion I was previously unaware of. "Grandpa," she said, "did you know that some volcanoes have been dormant for thousands of years and then just wake up?" "I did not know that," I said. "Isn't that amazing? Like they just wait, and then they have things to say." I thought about that for a long time after we hung up. Maybe that's what the last year was for me, a long dormancy, and then, finally, having things to say, and the courage and the means to say them. My name is Michael Brennan. I'm 70 years old. I'm a retired firefighter and a grandfather and a neighbor and a man who kept his principles when it would have been easier to give them up. I lost my house, my savings, and my trust in my only son, all in a single autumn. And I got back my home, my finances, my granddaughter, my community, and something I can only describe as my own life, more fully and consciously mine than it has ever been. Real family is the people who actually want you there. I found mine, and on this west-facing porch, watching the sun go down over a neighborhood that is starting to know my name, I am exactly where I want to be. What would you have done?